Hey pals, I'm here today to do a sort of rest of the month of June TBR. Now I don't usually do monthly TBRs anymore, I tend to do seasonal TBRs, and I will be doing a summer TBR towards the end of this month with lots of books I'm super excited to read. But I've just picked up lots of books from the library that are 2024 releases, and because of that I have lots of people waiting for them. And so I have a lot of books out that have to be read by the end of the month, so I'm going to focus on all those. And there's also a few other books I'm just going to mention that I would like to read if I read a crazy amount this month, which I'm in the mood for, so let's see. But I'm going to talk about the ones that have to be read first. One thing I will mention is you might hear me mention all these books and think like this is impossible. I have done the maths and I think it is possible, so we'll talk about that later. But secondly, I do DNF a fair amount of books, in particular new releases, because there's not a ton of reviews about them. So yeah, I won't necessarily read all of these, but I will attempt to. I do talk about my DNFs every month over on my Patreon, which is something I really enjoy doing. And it's kind of nice to have it not be on the main channel, because I know sometimes people don't like you being negative about books, but yeah, I think it's interesting to talk about why you've DNF'd a book, because it helps me to work through like what does and doesn't work for me. And sometimes it's not necessarily me saying it's a bad book. Sometimes it is. It's me saying, I don't like this, but you might like this. So yeah, that's always over there, which is always linked below. So firstly, this book has to be read in the next couple of days because it is due back very soon at the library. So I'm currently reading this one, I'm a third of the way through. And that is This Is How You Remember It by Catherine Prasivka. I featured this in a video where I read, I think the first chapter of about 8 books that were new releases to see if I wanted to read them. And this is one of the ones that I ended up deciding I did want to read with a few others. And this is about a young girl coming of age during the time of like the internet being developed. I'm assuming I was born in 1990 and it feels like maybe this character was born a little bit before that, just because our access to the internet is yeah, a little bit different to the kind of access I had. And it's about how that really shapes her life in really negative ways. And I believe that there is an incident in this book, which is, I think, something to do with sexual assault that's linked to, you know, the internet and things like that. And it's about how she deals with that. What I'll say is it's really well written. It's very true to girlhood, in a way that I'm finding quite depressing, because it really reminds me of some of the more negative aspects of growing up as a young girl. So yeah, we'll see how I get on with this one. I've got a couple of 100 pages left. Then the next one that I would have to read regardless of it being due back at the library so soon is Whalefall by Elizabeth O'Connor. And the reason for that is that this is the book club pick for my Patreon this month. We read a new release one month and then a backlist book the next month. This is our new release month. And I think this sounds really intriguing. I really enjoyed Euphoria by Lily King, which is about a few anthropologists, I think in New Guinea. It's historical and it's about some real life anthropologists. This is fictionalised. It is about a couple of anthropologists who visit a Welsh island in 1938, and a young Welsh woman on the island starts to guide them round. And it is about how interacting with them makes her see like how her horizons could be broadened and makes her realise there is a life off the island. And it's about all those kind of conflicting emotions. And as with every book I have come into my house, I've read the first couple of pages, and this is incredibly descriptive in terms of the natural world, which is something I really enjoy. And I very much like books that are set in this time period. And something else I'll say is, for a debut novel, this has some really well-known authors on the back raving about it, including Cole Tobin, I'm rubbish at saying his name, Maggie O'Farrell and Anne Enright. So yeah, this is one that is getting lots of praise. The next one I'm pretty sure is another debut novel, and it's a little bit different to a lot of the other novels I have here because it is initially set in the future. And this is a family drama that opens in 2040 and is told backwards up to, or back to, 2014. I have read a couple of books that are told backwards. It's something I really enjoy. I think it can, yeah, just look at the story in a really interesting way. And I believe this is focused around a family who live in Shanghai, and you mainly hear about the story through the perspective of the mothers and daughters, but I think you also hear about them from some sort of characters on the periphery of their life. An example is a man who drives them. And yeah, I think this is going to be really intriguing. It says in the blurb that it's a really interesting look at what it's like to live in like an ultra modern city like Shanghai, but also has lots of links to a kind of traditional past. So yeah, I think this is going to be kind of different. I'm really in the mood for family dramas, so this is one I'm going to try and read all of them, but this is one I will probably head to sooner in the month. And I have two more family dramas that both are about a group of sisters, both about, I think, 4 sisters who have lost one of their sisters, and both have kind of similar covers that I love. So can you see those covers? I hope you can. So let's talk about this one first, seeing as I'm holding it in my right hand. And that is The Alternatives by Keelan Hughes. I think that's how you say it. I love this cover. I think it is brilliant. And as I said, I read the first pages of most books that come into my home. This is definitely the one that I liked the first few pages of the most out of all these books I'm talking about. So again, we'll definitely prioritise this one. This is about 4 Irish sisters who are all returning to a family cottage that's in a kind of remote rural area because one of their sisters, who I believe is a geologist, has gone missing. And they think that her going missing is somehow linked to climate change and the sort of global tragedies that are happening because of climate change. And so they're sort of like looking into that, and it says it's an unforgettable portrait of a family perched on our collective precipice, told by one of Ireland's most gifted storytellers. So yeah, I really like the initial tone of this. It had a kind of wry comedic tone, which is something I really enjoy. And I always want to read more novels about sisters. So yeah, looking forward to this one. And the next one, as I've just shown you, is Blue Sisters. And this is getting absolutely rave reviews. And yeah, everybody is trying to read it at the moment. So I need to prioritise this so that I can take it back to the library for others to read. This is about 4 sisters who I think are from New York. And they're all kind of struggling in different ways when one of their sisters unexpectedly dies. A year later, they all come back to their family home in New York because they want to stop it being sold. And it's about them coming together and trying to deal with their grief and their loss and trying to find kind of a love for life again. And yeah, this is just getting amazing reviews. I haven't read her first novel, Cleopatra and Frankenstein. Equally brilliant cover, but I'm not really interested in the type of relationship that book was examining. But like I said, I am very much interested in family dramas, in particular about a group of siblings, especially sisters. So it's going to be interesting to read these 2 books kind of side by side and see how they deal with a similar topic in different ways. And then the next one is another one that's getting amazing reviews, and that is Cinema Love by Jiaming Tang. So this is a novel that spans, I think, a lot of years. It says it spans post-socialist China, 1980s Chinatown, and contemporary New York. It's a staggering, tender epic about men and women who are grappling with the past, their forbidden relationships, and their unspoken desires. So when this opens, we are looking at a man and wife who have been living in Chinatown in New York for about 30 years. And it goes back into the past and looks at their life in China before they left, and you find out that the husband was frequenting a cinema where a lot of gay men went to secretly meet one another. And the woman who became his wife was the woman who sold tickets and kind of organised this so that these men could meet in secret and be protected. And my understanding is this novel is about the wives of these gay men rather than the men themselves, which I think is a really interesting lens to look at this story through. So yeah, I'm always, interested in centering women's stories, and I think a lot of the time when we get stories about men who have wives, their wives are kind of sidelined. So I think it's interesting to just kind of spin the perspective on this one, and I think this is going to be a really emotional novel, so one I am intrigued by. The next one is another one I really loved the first few pages of, and I felt immediately pulled in by this one, and that is Evenings and Weekends by Oisin McKenna. So I was going to put this on my summer TBR, but it has to be returned very quickly, so I'm going to read it now. But it is set in June, so I feel like I'm reading it at the right time. I'm going to read you the first and last paragraph of this blurb because I think they're brilliant. Summer in London stops for no one, not the half-naked boozers, stoners and cruisers, the hen parties glugging from bejewelled bottles, the drag queens puffing on hurried fags. It's June 2019 and everyone has converged on the streets, parks, beer gardens and street corners to revel in the collective joys of being alive. As Saturday night approaches, all the characters' lives are set to change forever. Set across 2 scorching hot days in the feverish capital, evenings and weekends is a vivid portrait of a city and its inhabitants that announces the arrival of a vital new literary talent. The premise of this is that you're following, I think, around 5 characters' perspectives, and they're all somehow linked. One is the mother of another one is the ex-boyfriend of another, one's the friend. And you're watching them over this weekend as, things are happening in their lives that all feel like shit's just going to go completely wrong. I very much like novels that look at a group of characters who are sort of tangled up together and are all on their own journeys, but you as a reader can see that maybe those journeys are going to converge in maybe a kind of calamitous way. And I very much liked the writing style of this author in the first few pages, so very much excited to read this one. This next one I think I stumbled across when I was looking at new releases that my library had just purchased, and I thought it sounded really intriguing, and that is Bad Habit by Alana S. Portero, translated from the Spanish by Mara Faye Letham. And it says, I urge you to read Bad Habit, and that's from Pedro Almodovar. I haven't watched one of his films in, at least 10 years, but I remember watching all his films as a teenager and just absolutely loving them. So that has reminded me that I need to go back and read some more. And it says, we follow an unnamed young trans woman as she grows up in a working class suburb that has no place for her in downtown Madrid. It says this is blistering and told in an irrepressible voice. It definitely illuminates the inextricable ties between gender and class, which is something I'm super interested in, the search for identity and the power of chosen family. Shimmering in its lyrical beauty and vivid in its realism, this is a mesmerising story of self-realisation that speaks to the outsider in all of us. And I had a little look at the first few pages and flicked through, and this looks like it's going to be told in almost vignette style chapters, which isn't something I love, but I'm intrigued enough by the story to give this one a go, and it could work for me in this book, I don't know, so we shall see. And this is a book that I think I maybe hauled back in January or February and had to return because I didn't read it in time, and other people had requested it. And I still really wanted to read it, and recently I was I'm really in the mood to read that one, so I requested it again. So I definitely have to read it this time because I refuse to return this one a second time and borrow it a third time. And that is Interesting Facts About Space by Emily Austen. I really enjoyed her debut novel, which was Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead. Again, I feel like I'm someone who says, I don't really enjoy comedy in books, but I kind of do enjoy this kind of wry, kind of odd comedy. A lot of people compared her first novel to the tone of Fleabag, which I kind of agree with. This one is super difficult to describe. So it says that Enid is many things: lesbian, serial dater, deaf in one ear, space obsessive, true crime fanatic. When she's not listening to grisly murder podcasts, she's managing her crippling phobia of bald people, which is just such a weird thing to put in a book, and trying hard not to think about her mortifying teenage years. It says, as she fumbles her way through her first serious relationship and navigates a new family life for her estranged half-sister, she starts to worry that someone is following her. As her paranoia spirals out of control, Eden must contend with her mounting suspicion that something is seriously wrong with her. And I think this, from what I've heard, is kind of really tonally similar to her first novel, which I guess some people, want something a bit different, but I am very much in the mood to read something like her first novel. So looking forward to this one. So because I'm a complete geek, I sat down yesterday and wrote down how many pages each of these novels are. I wrote down how many pages I have left to read in This Is How You Remember It. And in total, all the books I've spoken about add up to 2,496 pages. There are 21 days left of reading in this month, so that average is at 119 pages per day, which for me is maybe 2 hours worth of reading. I think my usual rate for an average size text is a page a minute. A lot of these books probably have larger font than I'm used to. I think hardbacks tend to, so I may read a bit faster than that. So I think that's entirely doable. Like I said, I'd be shocked if I don't DNF a couple of these. I know that's kind of maybe a bleak thing to say, and I know a lot of people, I always find this really interesting when I hear people say this, say that they don't often DNF books because they're really good at knowing their taste. Now for me, I know my taste in pace and theme, like the type of books I'm interested in, but you can't tell what the writing style is going to be from a blurb. And you can tell a little bit from the first couple of pages, but not that much. And so for me, it's entirely down to writing style, whether I get on with these books, and that's something I'm not sure of yet. So I'm sure I'll DNF a few of them. I would love to not, but I'll be shocked if I don't. So those are my priority. But of course, I'm going to mention a few others. Now, firstly, I do listen to audiobooks, so I definitely have room for a few audiobooks this month. And I have a few audiobooks already downloaded on Everand that I really want to get to. And they're all, again, sort of newish releases. And I was really happy to see all three of these on Everand. So the first one is the brilliantly titled Dinner on Monster Island by Tanya Di Rosario. This is an essay collection, and I've only listened to a couple of essay collections on audio, but this one's narrated by the author, and that's something I really enjoy, and I just am intrigued by this one. It says the author recalls growing up as a queer brown fat girl in Singapore, blending memoir with elements of history, pop culture, horror films and current events to explore the nature of monsters and what it means to be different. And I read the first few pages of this as a Kindle sample and immediately felt pulled in by her voice. I'm interested in books that kind of talk about pop culture a bit, and that's something I don't necessarily read a lot of. But I'm intrigued to read the essays that focus more on horror films, because that's something I watch a fair amount of. I'm a little bit of a baby when it comes to horror films. Johnny watches much scarier films than I do. But I think it'll be interesting to hear about her thoughts on monsters and sort of linking that back to how we portray them in cinema. So I'm interested in this one. The next one is The Manicurist's Daughter by Susan Lee, and I immediately wanted to read this one. As soon as I saw the cover and the title, I was like, I hope this is a memoir. It is, and it is about a really interesting topic, one that's very difficult. So Susan and her mother were refugees from the Vietnam War. They escaped to California in the 1980s after 5 failed attempts. Her mother set up 2 really successful nail salons and was just doing really amazing. But then she died from a botched tummy tuck. And that was something that Susan didn't know how to deal with. Like, when you have lost someone in your life, in particular, someone so close to you as your mother, when you have to tell people that she died because of something like an operation that was unnecessary, elective surgery, cosmetic surgery, she says it's a really difficult conversation to have. And so she's really interested in the pressure of beauty standards, in particular, the pressure on women from a certain part of the world, and what it's like when they sort of bring those pressures to other countries. And she's kind of examining her relationship with her mother as linked to beauty standards, which is something I find fascinating. And again, I read the first few pages of this in the Kindle sample, really like the writing style. And then lastly on audio, we have Amanda Montell's new book, and that is The Age of Magical Overthinking, Notes on Modern Irrationality. I really enjoyed her previous book, Cultish. I listened to that one on audio too, and I nearly missed getting off a train because I was just so drawn in, and I was just listening and hadn't even noticed that the train had been stopped for ages and was at my stop, so I had to run off. And so whatever she was going to bring out next, I was going to want to read. And I also love this cover, and she narrates this one as well, and I really enjoyed her narration of the previous one. It says, in the modern information age, our brain's coping mechanisms have been overloaded and our rationality turned up to 11. The author blends cultural criticism and personal narrative to explore our modern cognitive biases and the powers, disadvantages and highlights of magical overthinking. So I think this delves into like information overload and anxiety as linked to that. And that's not necessarily something I'd be like really interested in reading a book about, but I just really like the way she worked through things in Cultish. So I'm interested to see how she talks about pretty much anything, to be honest. And this is why we get into wishful thinking territory, okay? Because this is the other books I would like to squeeze in if I can. Probably have enough to be getting on with, but these are the extras. So I recently read a Kindle sample of The Will of the Many by James Islington. and I really enjoyed it. It's an epic fantasy. It came out in the last year. It's getting rave reviews. And I haven't read a lot of fantasy lately. In particular, I don't tend to read a lot of like more fast-paced fantasy. I think this is a little bit faster paced than I would generally read. I read his, I think, debut novel, The Shadow I Thought Was Lost, which was the first book in a trilogy. And I initially really enjoyed it. It was a long time ago I read this book, but I really enjoyed it. And then something happened towards the end, which is just about a theme. I won't say what it was because it's a big spoiler, but I really do not get on with them books. And I realised it was going to be a key part of the other books, so I didn't carry on. But when he had a new book come out, I wasn't really intrigued by the premise of it, because I think this is based on like the Roman Empire, and it is in a like a sort of school setting, which is something I think is a little bit overdone. So all those things made me feel like whatever. And then I thought, I'm just going to read the sample because I'm kind of in the mood for fantasy. And it was a breath of fresh air to start getting immersed in our fantasy world. I do really enjoy quite complex magic systems in fantasy, which I know is a thing a lot of people find quite irritating. So I think he's kind of compared to Brandon Sanderson in that regard, who's an author I'm not necessarily, I loved his books when I read them, again, many years ago. I don't think I would so much anymore, but I do really like his world building and his magic systems and kind of how expansive and complex they are, which I think is what this author is going for. And I'm just really in the mood to read a chunky fantasy book and like speed through it. So that is what I'm hoping to do with this one. And then I just pulled a few books off my physical TBR because it would be good to actually read some of my own books. I think I have around 25 unread books, which I know isn't that many. I used to have, God, like 10 times that. But yeah, I like to keep my physical TBR quite small now, and it's yeah, getting to the point where combined with library books, you know, I have around 50 books to read, which is just, yeah, too much choice for me, really. Especially with all the audiobooks I have access to. So I bought this book a couple of months ago. I paid £40 for it, which is an obscene amount of money to pay. It's kind of double the price I would usually pay for a hardback in this country. But it is the third book, kind of like an interlinked trilogy. And I gave both the previous two 5 stars, and I really wanted a copy, and I couldn't get it in this country because it's not published here. So yeah, I ordered it from Canada. So it cost a lot. And I've had it for a couple of months and haven't read it. So I really want to read it. Also, my mum really wants to read it, so I need to read it so she can borrow it. And that is The Circle by Katharina Vermette. I can't talk about this very much because you can read them out of order, but yeah, I feel like talking about the details of this one would kind of spoil the others. What I will say is these books are set in Winnipeg, and they are predominantly focused around a group of Métis women, mainly 2 families that are linked together by one violent event. The first book, The Break, is focused on one of those families. The second book is focused on the other family, and I believe this is the book that kind of tangles these families up together along with other women in their lives. She does an amazing job of writing from multiple perspectives, which is something I love and adore. She always centres female voices, again, something I really enjoy. She writes about things that feel really tragic and hopeless, but yet her stories feel filled with hope and compassion and love between the characters. And mainly what her books examine is intergenerational trauma and the continued disregard for the lives of Indigenous people, in particular Indigenous women and girls, and yeah, how the systems continue to fail these people, but how these women persevere through all that. And she does all that with nuance and tact and just, yeah, perfection. And so I need to read this one. And I'm pretty sure as well, something I'll love even more is that I think a few of the characters are like teenage girls, which is something I love reading from the perspective of. So need to prioritise this one. Then I thought, I haven't been great at reading short story collections. I mean, I was going to say this year, for a few years, which is silly because I love them. And I have a few short story collections on my shelves, and so would like to start chipping away at them. So these 2 I picked up, I think either at the end of last year or the start of this year, and so I would really like to get to them. This first one is Sleeping Alone by Rue Freeman. I haven't heard many people talk about this at all, but the reviews I did see for it made it sound exceptional, and so it was one I really wanted to get through. It says it's a collection of rich and textured stories about crossing borders, both real and imagined. It spans the globe, moving from the secrets kept by siblings in Sri Lanka to the life of itinerants in New York City, to the unspoken love between a boarder and his landlady in Dublin. Follows a cast of misfits rendered with sensitivity, dignity and grace. And this is published by Grey Wolf Press. They are one of my favourite indie presses, And yeah, the comps for this book, you know, were lots of other short story collections I've enjoyed. So would like to actually read that one. And the other one, I picked this up, it was quite pricey because, it's not published here. It's published by another publisher I really love, Arsenal Pulp Press, who are a Canadian independent publisher. And yeah, I picked this up, must have been last year, from Gaze the Word in London, which is a bookstore I love, and I still haven't read it. And that is A Dream of a Woman by Casey Plett. This author has written I think a couple of short story collections and a novel. I'm intrigued by all of them, and so I picked this one up. It says it is centering transgender women seeking stable adult lives. It finds quiet truths in prairie high rises, in New York warehouses, in freezing Canadian winters and drizzly Oregon days. That really makes me want to read it even more. It says it's an ethereal meditation on partnership, sex, addiction, romance, groundedness and love, with quiet intensity and the intimate complexities of being human. That all sounds beautiful and like something I really want to read as soon as possible. So yeah, that has made me even more excited to read this one as soon as possible. I then have a stack of memoirs I would like to get to, and I hauled quite a few of them in a recent book haul, which I'll link above. So I should really read those, but I feel guilty because I have a couple of others that I hauled, I think last year, maybe around Christmas, that I still haven't read and really want to. So what I'm thinking of doing is prioritising these two this month and then getting to the ones I've more recently got over the summer. So the first one is Abandon Me by Melissa Phoebos. This is a personal essay collection from the author of Girlhood. That was one of my favourite reads a couple of years ago. Again, an interconnected essay collection that links the author's personal story with lots of subjects she's interested in. I loved and adored it. I think she's incredibly intelligent and just writes beautifully as well. And so just a combination of things I love. And yeah, I want to read all of her books, but this is another essay collection. It says, in this, she tries to reconnect with her birth father and finds that an instinct for self-erasure binds them as surely as their blood. She remains closely tied to the loving sea captain who raised her, absent for months at a time. The hypnotic story of an all-consuming long-distance affair with a woman marks her exploration of the worship and withdrawal that haunt her love life. Woven throughout is her insatiable hunger for self-knowledge, the difficult kind, and the powerful conviction the universal truths begin there. And then lastly, we have another memoir that I didn't realise I'd put two books like this on the list, but I think, again, they'll be interesting to read alongside one another. This is another memoir that looks at the author's relationship with her mother, and that is Speak Okinawa by Elizabeth Mika Briner. I have had this on my TBR, like virtual TBR, since it was released a few years ago, and I managed to get hold of a secondhand copy, like I said, last year. And yes, I've wanted to read it for 2 years, and I don't know why I haven't just prioritised it. This is about the fact that this author's mother was working as a hostess in a nightclub in US-occupied Okinawa when she met an American soldier who would become her husband. And it says that the language barrier and power imbalance defined their relationship and followed them to their life in suburban New York in this predominantly white neighbourhood. It says that while she felt almost no connection to her mother's distant home, neither did she feel comfortable amongst her peers. It wasn't until decades later that Elizabeth finally recognised the shame and self-loathing that haunted both her and her mother. So in this, she comes to terms with the embattled dynamics of her own family and reckons with the injustices that reverberate through the history of Okinawa and its people. Clear-eyed and profoundly humane, her book is a startling accomplishment, a heartfelt exploration of identity, inheritance, forgiveness, and what it means to be an American. So yeah, these are the sort of memoirs I love, so why is it sat on my shelves unread for over 6 months? I don't know. So those are all the books. Like I said, the library books, I will attempt all of them. We'll see what happens. And all the others are extras that I would very much like to get to. So it's going to be interesting to see what I actually manage at the end of the month. So what I'll probably do is actually do a June wrap up rather than what I've been doing lately, which is just like doing recent reads videos. I'll do an actual June wrap up so you can see what I actually achieved. And and maybe I'll mention if I DNF them, so you know if you want to know more, you can go and check out the Patreon video while I'll have spoken about them. But yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.